We just got a big live stream and blog post from Bungie about all the weapons returning in the Into the Light update. There's a lot to be excited about in this update, but I think what is much more interesting here is the design implications of reintroducing these classic weapons back into the game. Not only are some of the most powerful weapons in Destiny's history returning, but we're also reissuing raid weapons for all players. Are these decisions good for the game? Are they a mistake? Let's see what it means for the future of the game once this update comes out. Hey everyone, I'm Rizeki and welcome to my design analysis of the Into the Light Brave Arsenal weapon update. If you're new here and like what I have to say, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe for more videos like this one in the future. I try to release regular game design videos about Destiny as well as build guides, so if that's something that's interesting to you, definitely check them out in the future. With all that said, let's talk about the Brave Arsenal. For those unfamiliar, the Brave Arsenal is the collection of about 12 weapons returning from the history of Destiny, both D1 and D2. Some weapons were selected for their popularity, some for their significance to the story of the game, some for their infamy, and a few strong options previously exclusive to raids. No matter the origin of the weapon, each one is being updated with a new perk pool, as well as some gameplay updates to bring them more into line with modern weapon standards. There are some big reasons for why Bungie has decided to bring these weapons into the new update. There are three big overarching points here that I think hit the top level concepts. Number one, bringing back fan favorite weapons to encourage players to return. Number two, giving players access to strong weapons prior to the final shape. And three, enticing players to try other content in the game. We, of course, will start by talking about bringing back fan favorites and the implications of that. Destiny is in a very strange situation right now. The final shape was delayed by multiple months, Season of the Wish is the longest season of all time, and players are already burnt out on playing Destiny prior to this season for various reasons, notably Lightfall. Bungie is in a position where they need to find a way to encourage veteran players to return to the game. Bungie needs these players to keep the game's population alive, and bringing these players back during the lead up to the next expansion is key for securing pre-orders, giving them a better chance at a successful expansion launch. The best way to get veterans reinvested in the game is to give them weapons to hunt for that play on their nostalgia. I personally have very fond memories of playing the Forge and trying to complete my Crucible rank to finally get my own Recluse. Even if the new versions of Recluse and Hammerhead are not exactly the same as the original versions, they are still desirable because they have that sentimental value. Additionally, newer players who may not have had the privilege to try these old weapons will be able to get their feet wet and try them for the very first time. Even if you didn't play during the Mountaintop meta, you sure as heck heard about it. Now you could grind out your very own copy of the weapon and get a taste of what it was like back in the day. Not only are veteran players able to relive the old days, but new players also get to relive those days for the very first time. All of this will help drive players, old and new, to return to the game. As we saw with the 30th anniversary update, using nostalgia as a vector for increasing engagement with the game is very useful for the devs, and players generally feel positively towards these updates. Overall, this is a win-win for both devs and players. What is arguably more important than the nostalgia factor is what these returning weapons mean for the lead up to the final shape. The final shape is the capstone to the Light and Dark saga, the pinnacle of the 10-year journey of the story of Destiny. People will be naturally playing the game during the final weeks before the new expansion to prepare or to catch up to the current story for the first time. Everyone is going to need a loadout that will help them get set up for success once the expansion goes live. Most, if not all, of the returning weapons are incredibly strong options. As Datto said in a recent video detailing the new weapons, we are approaching the ceiling of power creep with some of them. Players are going to be logging in if only to just grind out some weapons that will make their life easier in the future. It's a great opportunity for new players to come into contact with a loadout that will catch them up to players that had been playing throughout the Lightfall year. This will naturally motivate them to play since it's the easiest way to catch up. And being caught up prior to the expansion can help alleviate any possible anxiety of not being strong enough to be able to compete. For players who are regulars, and especially those who will be prepping for the Day 1 raid, the Brave Arsenal is going to be a key source of extremely powerful Day 1 options. Edge Transit, for example, looks to be a great boss DPS option at first glance, Hammerhead is going to be a great ad clear option, and Mountaintop provides great movement tech, as well as the potential for boss DPS rotations as well. Players are going to want to farm Onslaught for these weapons over and over just to get that perfect roll in preparation for the hardest day 1 raid we've probably ever seen. Again, whether you're new or returning, these weapons are going to catapult you to the top of the meta, and everyone is going to be coming back to bolster their loadouts with some of the strongest options available. I think one of the most intriguing things Bungie has decided to do was bring raid weapons into the Brave Arsenal. My first thought when I heard this during the live stream was, what? Why? That seems odd. But then I started to think about it a little bit more. At the highest level, raid weapons like Forbearance or Succession are traditionally solid weapons in PvE. As I said before, these weapons will just be great additions to your loadout going into the final shape. But I think Bungie is actually doing something a bit sneaky here. I think it's similar to how Riven's Wishes gave Last Wish weapons, and what it could have led to. A very large percentage of Destiny players have never actually raided before. Off the top of my head, only about 5% of the Destiny player base has actually completed a raid. So that means 95% of players have never touched a raid weapon before. And that's crazy. And, well, raid weapons are some of the best weapons available in the game. By giving these players a taste of the raid weapons available, it might actually entice them to play raids to get access to other weapons. Wow, Succession is really good. I wonder what the other Deepstone Crypt weapons are like. Maybe I should try and play the raid and then I could try out the other weapons. Getting more players to interact with more endgame activities will help to not only increase player numbers, but it also helps to change these players into regulars. And the more players that raid, the more of a reason Bungie has to invest time and energy into making more and more endgame content than they have up until this point. Overall, these 3 points are all related to how the Brave Arsenal is going to be a catalyst to bring players back into the game, and hopefully is a way to hype up those players before the release of the final shape. But other than winning players back, what are the effects of these weapons being added into the game? Are they too strong? Are we going to get infamous metas like Recluse and PvP again? Is it really a good idea to give raid weapons away for free? Let's tackle some of these concerns. As mentioned earlier, these weapons are really strong. We know the perk pools now, and although some of the more broken perks and weapons have been reworked, they are still approaching the ceiling of power creep. We could look at this in a similar way to Well of Radiance. I made a whole video about Well, and how abilities like this over-centralize the game and require the game to be designed around the existence of that ability. Definitely check out that video if you haven't watched it before. The Brave weapons, or really any weapon released that could be too powerful, could have a similar effect to Well of Radiance. I think at a first glance, these weapons are strong, but not overly strong. The designers during the reveal livestream had highlighted how they specifically re-engineered some weapons to prevent what caused their over-centralization in the first place. For example, Master of Arms has been cut back from a 50% increase to somewhere around 20%. It's still a really good perk, but it isn't so strong that it will dominate the game. Probably. The bigger concern with weapons being released with this kind of power creep is actually the implications for future releases. Destiny 2 is all about loot and farming for new weapons. Every new content drop, Bungie needs to create new weapons that move the needle, even slightly, to incentivize players to farm for the new weapons. If there is nothing worth grinding, then no one is going to have a reason to play the game. Because of this, after the release of the Brave Arsenal, Bungie is going to be forced to make even stronger weapons to make it worth farming activities other than Onslaught. If we're already approaching the power ceiling, is it healthy to go even further? Should we just break through the ceiling? I personally don't think it's a good idea to infinitely scale our power higher and higher, but maybe it could work. After all, some games go down the path of if everything's broken, then nothing's broken. This philosophy is very dependent on the game being designed for it, but it's an interesting thing to consider inside the Destiny 2 sandbox. But I digress. I'm primarily worried about how Bungie is going to one-up the Brave weapons going into the future, and how they decide to maintain loot that motivates players to track down the perfect role after the Brave Arsenal is released. The raid weapons are also a weird case study. Returning weapons like Midnight Coup from the Leviathan raid makes perfect sense. The raid is not currently playable in the game, so giving another mean of obtaining these weapons is fine. Where things get strange is when we give currently available raid weapons a path to acquire them in the general loot pool. Succession is from Deepstone Crypt, and Forbearance is from Vow of the Disciple. The Brave versions of these weapons contain the best perk combinations available on the raid versions of the weapons. So is there still a reason to play the raids in the first place? Are we taking away from the achievements of the players that spent the time to farm these raids for the weapons originally? Raid weapons are usually very strong weapons that can be justified by the cost of completing the raid. Endgame content should give endgame loot. As I said earlier, my first thought when seeing these weapons available in the Brave Arsenal was, this is not okay. But after thinking about it more, I think it's an overall positive change. Part of the draw of the raid versions of the weapons is collecting the crafting patterns, for example. All Brave weapons can only be farmed, not crafted. To have the privilege of crafting raid weapons, a player must demonstrate mastery over a raid by clearing it multiple times. And at least in the case of Forbearance and Vow of the Disciple, the Adept version of the raid weapon is still only available as a raid drop. I think that if all of the Vow of the Disciple weapons were added to the general loot pool, I would be pretty concerned. But since only one weapon from each of the raids is being re-released, it should be fine. I don't mind giving players access to weapons that could improve their gameplay. Giving a taste of what is available in endgame content not only helps players who do not raid feel like they can compete with the 5% who do, but it also might encourage them to try out endgame content like raids for themselves. And we all know raids are the best content in Destiny, so sharing that side of the game with more players is, of course, a big positive. And heck, the Brave weapons will be a great way to give players a strong loadout that they could feel comfortable bringing into their first raid. As much as I like to reward players who are at the top of the game, I think it is also healthy to provide a path for others to make their way to the top. And if giving them access to a few raid weapons is the way to do it, I am all for it. Okay, that was a lot of stuff, so let's just recap my thoughts for a bit. The Brave Arsenal is essentially a way for Bungie to entice players to either return to the game or to invite new players to the game prior to the final shape. Everyone, both Bungie and players, wants the final shape to succeed. By playing into the nostalgia of old metas throughout Destiny's history, we can recapture the magic of the game that may have been lost in recent years. Veteran players can relive the memories of using their favorite guns, and new players can experience some of the best Destiny had to offer for the first time. Not only are the returning weapons playing into nostalgia, but they're also very strong. Players need to feel ready to tackle the new expansion, and whether that's because your vault is empty or you're trying to get the best of the best for the day one raid, these weapons are going to be a great way to prepare. Just the action of prepping for the new content is going to build hype and help to bring a wave of players back into the game during the lead up to release. Finally, giving raid weapons to players is going to hopefully encourage them to try out the content where these weapons originally came from. Endgame PvE is the pinnacle of content in Destiny, and sharing that with more players is going to make the game more enjoyable for a lot of them. Raid weapons are typically very strong, so maybe getting a taste of them will give players a hunger for more. Loot is king, after all. If you find out that the best loot is from a raid, you'll probably be more likely to try them out for yourself. The only real concern that I have with the Brave Arsenal is the power creep. A lot of returning weapons dominated the game during their times, so Bungie needs to be careful when reintroducing them. So far, it seems like they took a firm stance on making sure the outliers have been redesigned to match modern standards for weapon design. My other related concern is for future loot and weapons. The Brave Arsenal needs to be power crept out of the game at some point to incentivize farming new loot on release. So Bungie needs to take a very careful look at about how much power creep they're willing to commit to. There needs to be a balance between motivating players to farm new loot and keeping the game in a healthy state. All of this is yet to be seen until the weapons release in a few weeks, so we shall see if these weapons end up being too strong or just right. I have faith that Bungie took extra care when designing the Into the Light update and kept all of these concerns in mind. So those are all my thoughts. Overall, I'm very happy with the direction of the Brave Arsenal, with the exception of a few cautious concerns. But what do you think? Are you a fan of the new weapons? Are they too strong? Too weak? Did Bungie bring back one of your favorites? Did they miss one of them? Let me know in the comments down below, or over in our Discord server linked in the video description. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. I upload lots of videos talking about Destiny 2 design, so if you're interested in seeing more, I'd love to have you around. But that's it for now. As always, I've been Rizeki, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.